Welcome to the Heroes of Reality podcast, a podcast about the game of life and the hero's journey we all experience. Let's jump in with our host, Dylan Watkins, as he introduces today's guest.
Welcome, young adventurers. Dylan here. And on today's podcast, I interview Amir Bozorgzadeh. He is the co-founder and CEO of VirtuLeap, a VR startup that unlocks neuroscience with virtual reality to help pharmaceutical companies accelerate the approval of drugs designed to treat cognitive illnesses like Alzheimer's disease. Previously, Amir founded Game Guys, a mobile game studio based in Dubai. And the first time social impact startup to introduce time banking to the Middle East. He's an alumni of the York University and THNK School of Creative Leadership. Amir is contributing writer to the tech blogs like VentureBeat, TechCrunch, and on the topics of emerging tech, spatial computing, and startups. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Amir.
Thanks for having me, Dylan.
Hey, brother, glad to have you. I'm super excited as well, man. I love all the things that we're talking about in your bio, the virtual reality, helping people grow, and like really helping people level up in life. So I'd love to dive into this and just talk to me a little bit more about your background and what brought you into the world of virtual reality and helping people level up.
Sure. So I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, and then I been an expat, lost at sea. In places like Dubai and all across Europe, and now based in Portugal for about, I think 10 years or so. My background is as a market researcher to begin with, and then I moved into games publishing during the first recession one wave ago, and then I started taking a stab in the social impact space. And then, blast a few years later, and I'm scribbling away, writing article after article, covering this thing called spatial computing and virtual reality and augmented reality and their intersection with other emerging technologies like, blockchain and big data and AI learning tools and all the other buzzwords we can use. And that got me into kind of a intersection point of neurosciences and VR, which is the startup that I'm working on right now.
Dope. That's great, man. When you're talking about it, there's something that I always see, like this path that people go on from a journey of business to impact to really just more being kind of a journalist in the space and really like understanding and digesting everything to eventually taking all that data in, creating it, and leveling up, almost like a self-driven AI system that you first got to ingest all the data and be able to process it, and then you output something creative and unexpected. Like, could you talk to me a little bit before I talk about the journalist piece, the social impact piece? Like, why did you get into social impact? What was your motivation behind it? And then what kind of social impact really gets you the most excited?
Well, it kind of relates initially to what you were kind of describing in your own words, but what I immediately identified with by one word, and that's a very psychoanalytical word called circumambulation, which is kind of the idea that a person is more or less thrown into the world, and they somewhat are kind of like going around a circle and narrowing in like a spiral based on resonating with ideas and things that really bring them alive, and that's really what it is to be kind of the fool thrown out into the journey of the hero's path and kind of figuring out who you are, and then magnetically kind of just attracting yourself to this and that and this and that, and then it just all comes together as a jumble of things that kind of you merge together as a real like resonating force that, ultimately, if you're lucky and you have the courage, you formulate that into an aim and into a dream.
That's beautiful. You say circumambulation? Is that what you said the word is?
Yes, it's a really old school word, circumambulation, and it's the idea that you're spiraling in. You're trying. You notice you want to, like, from the point of view of a hero's journey in terms of self realization. A person is trying to, alchemically kind of take the crude metal of what they are and refine it into the gold. It's what we're all after, I think, more or less. And all of these outward external adventures that we're on, hopefully, always has an inward adventure, and the result is first and foremost becoming a better version of you.
Yeah, man, for sure. Yeah, there's always call it the hero's two journeys, and what you're talking about is almost like a personal alchemy. You're transforming a lower substance into a higher substance through some sort of alchemy, and that combination of you want this goal, but along the goal, it's who you become to get the goal that really is the deeper, more meaningful thing behind it,
Right.
which is super powerful. So with that, you got into to journaling and journalism and taking in all these data sets of like as we all the buzzwords, right? AI, VR, augmented reality, everything that's probably crypto as well. Throw all that fun stuff together, and along the way, I mean, what did you have as revelations that gave you the confidence, the courage, and the luck to be able to step into the next space?
Luck is a very important word. Serendipity is even a better word.
Yeah.
Again, I don't look at things as too random often. I often see, every moment as profound or potentially profound. And if you aren't experiencing profundity in this moment, then it's because you got, barriers of all sorts keeping you from realizing that. So, journaling or covering the space for those blogs, I actually didn't make $1 in 4 years of dozens and dozens of articles. I did that again for me to have a space to research and understand a sector that I was very, compelled to participate in, but I didn't know where and how. And during that process of journaling, which was really me just putting on my research hat and interviewing, hundreds of people, during a 4-year span, I found out that there's 2 critical use cases for virtual reality where it actually has a critical use case that has a huge impact on society. And that's healthcare applications and educational applications. Everything else is nice to have. Gaming's great, but in terms of having like a game-changing effect on something that's critical to people's quality of lives, it's those 2 sectors, and that's what got me into it. But it took all that research and took several years, and not $1 did I earn from any of those articles. It was just a means to an ends.
Yeah, man, it's so powerful what you said. There's a couple of things. One, you're talking about there's this digestion period of like, almost getting pregnant with an idea, but you really need to, like, much like a baby grows inside a stomach, you needed to give that space. And in order to have that space, you needed to fill it up with everything it needs to grow, with all the nutrients to give birth to this thing. And at the same time, as you get exposed to these things, some people say, I like VR, I'm gonna step into it. What's my tool belt for my past life? And then they try to hammer with that. I make film. I'm gonna make a 360 film. And there's just no, they don't allow that space, that gap, that growth, that digestion period to really get past what we call the trough of disillusionment, where you go and you try something out and you're like, you get so excited by VR, but you really don't understand the value of VR until you see hundreds of things and you realize that's cool, that's a gimmick. That's cool, that's a gimmick. And then you saw the true value. I totally agree with you. Education and medical innovations in the virtual life space are 2 of the areas that actually provide true value beyond, wow, that's cool, and oh my God, that scared the crap out of me. Like those types of things that you have in the virtual space is things that make virtual reality powerful, are things that are risky, things that are rare, things that are dangerous, things that are difficult, right? And medical and education are all those things, those educations that you can kind of take over someone's reality and really create a new reality for them, which is super powerful. And why I love talking to people that create virtual reality applications, especially in this type of space, because you're literally crafting a reality around someone to really have them go through it like you're the dungeon master in their game of life, and you're taking them to a new space. So what I would love to see here is, talk to me a little bit about Virtual Leap. Talk to me about what it is, why is it different, and ultimately, how are you helping transform the user and or what they're doing to bring them to another level if they didn't have the virtual reality?
Right. Well, I mean, like you just said, and you agree, thankfully, the critical use cases are in those areas. And why are they in those areas? Because virtual reality is the first digital format that transcends screen-based formats like your tablets and your smartphones, which have been amazing for maximizing accessibility because they're just right in your pocket, but they exclude the body. And what we know about the human condition and human psychology, and even the nonverbal aspects of the human circuitry, like the autonomic nervous system, that actually believes that a virtual reality simulation is real, is that that's what VR does. VR triggers our vestibular balance system, our proprioception, into believing that I'm standing on a very tall precipice or a tall building or something. And my knees, regardless of my cognition, ego, whatever, knows I'm in my living room, my knees buckle and shake because my phobia of heights is triggered. So this is the first digital format that does that. That it's digital, fine, but it triggers our body into believing it's actually a simulacrum, a imitation of reality that's so close to it that just like a lie detector test, you don't want necessarily as a criminal, for example, if you're on a lie detector test, for your body to tell the truth, and you don't know what the hell is going on. Why is my body and my pulse telling the truth? Well, there's aspects of our nonverbal side of our, not consciousness, but just our psychology and maybe, I don't know, biochemistry, that connects and engages and is compelled by VR experiences. And that creates a substantial myriad of healthcare, medical, diagnostic, therapeutic, training simulations that I think people that don't know that chemical kind of relationship that VR stimulates, they don't understand why. But that's why the FDA just opened up last year a new category called medical extended reality. If you read Brendan Spiegel's VRX books, he cites the 5,000 studies to date that have illustrated how VR can be used for therapeutic and diagnostic applications and the like. And it's kind of uncanny that COVID hit when it did, because it was exactly when VR was able to kind of emerge out of experimentation and really come into gear at a time when we need it the most.
That's super cool. Yeah. I'm getting a whole new vocabulary from you. So every time you do, I'm writing down these words as you go through them. Simulacrum, is that what you said?
Simulacrum. Yeah, it's a title of a book, kind of like a predecessor to the Matrix movie. It's a book based on an idea of simulation theory and the like. By the way, I didn't even talk about virtually, but I got carried away.
Well, I'll touch on it. I'll come back to this. There's a couple things you said that I think is super cool. One, you're talking, your body tells the truth in VR, but basically your body tells you your own truth, right? Because we're all living in our own distorted reality as we step through it, and we share realities that we come together and collide. And we know that, like, depending on whose frame is stronger, you take over that reality and you move forward, right? So what's really cool you're telling me is, like, yeah, if you're afraid of heights, if there's a story that you're telling in your brain is that I don't like heights, you might lie to everybody else, but your body's gonna be like, no, we know the truth. You're terrified. You better get off this ledge. And so your body telling you your own truth back to you inside reality and being able to show that biochemical truth, super interesting stuff. And then you're also talking about Brendan Spiegel and his an article that he wrote on
VRX.
Book VRX.
Yeah. He's one of the healthcare pioneers at Cedars-Sinai, and he's probably, his VRX is like the seminal piece. Anyone listening to this and interested in this topic, read Brendan Spiegel's book. I have no relationship. I'm not going to get royalty from this, but he deserves that credit for what he's accomplished.
Yeah, just click on Amir's link below. And
yeah, but VR is older than what we know. I know everyone knows more or less that there's been previous iterations and waves, but I mean, VR was initially, the proponents of VR weren't geeks like me. They were, a sort of different kind of geek. There was Timothy Leary and Terrence McKenna. Those were the people who were talking about virtual reality during the first generation. And why? Because they understood the psychological aspects and dimensions to what virtual reality does. And, clinics have been using VR for over 25 years, just using really crappy tech. The good tech is now out, but desensitization therapy to phobias like spiders and the phobia of heights that I'm actually mentioning to you, but I actually have it. Nice. I've been able to substantially reduce my fear of heights using really cool and scary ass experiences like plank and the climb up and so on.
Yeah, there's it even goes farther back than that. You're looking at like the Sensorama in the 1950s, where it was like this big giant device, like that, then followed by the sort of Damocles and on and on and on. But you're right, like these realities, and they were also experimentals, very much how the computers were also created by people that were, I would say, barely in this reality. I mean, they were touching into very other forms of reality extension, and what I call reality stacking pharmaceuticals along with virtual reality into a new space. That right there is, it takes these wild west pioneers to come through. People see the value where it goes from crazy zone to prolific, and then the mainstream can adopt the prolific by looking at it going, wow, that is incredible. Right. And then things that you're talking about right now is going into the area of things that are scary are usually amazingly beneficial, and they help you grow. It's because you're like, I have a fear of heights, and I beat the crap out of myself in VR until that went away. And that's that to me is so awesome because you're using VR for its really intended purpose, which is helping you reach your full potential. And that because you can step in, what reality do you want to have? It's like YouTube. People create their own realities in YouTube. You could surf the internet on YouTube all day long and I don't know, and get really enamored with all the hatred and vitriol and read the YouTube comments, get deep in the dark hole.
True.
Or you can find all positivity and love and inspiration, but VR has so much more power for that. So like with that, you talked a little bit about, and I think we're going to get there with the virtually on and what's inside there. Can you walk me through? Can you give me the what I call humans first virtual reality, our imagination and mental model? Walk me through Virtual Leap on what people experience, what would they do, and what is the benefits of the system?
Sure. One of the amazing aspects, and the one that I'm most obviously, because I drink the Kool-Aid first of all, but I'm most into is what are the actual neuroscience implications of the technology, in the direction of where we've seen the evolution of neuropsychological assessment tools throughout the last decade really become more and more accessible and advanced. For example, I think only Japan is the only country that it's mandatory by law if you're employed to do a cognitive assessment once a year. They find it so important to do cognitive assessments because they see brain health as important as we see just physical health alone. I think with COVID, we're starting to be more and more appreciative of what our brain health matters, our mental health, our mental fitness, all these terms, and what do they really mean. And so our Virtual Leap, what we're doing is we're essentially taking a lot of those standardized neuropsychological assessment tools that have been used by neurologists for decades and decades to assess someone's cognitive function, like their memory skills, their information processing skills, their problem solving skills, and take these and translate them into these 3D rendered environments in VR that test those particular cognitive functions, but on top of that, also spatial orientation, motor control, spatial audio awareness. And so we created this library of closed loop short mini games that take about 3 minutes a pop. And what they do is they're basically like Mary Poppins, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. These are games, but we don't design them to be addictive or to maximize session length. In fact, we don't want you playing them that often because we don't want you to habituate to the game and therefore just get good at the game. They're just each one designed to just assess you according to some parameters of cognitive function and give you a sense of how you stand according to averages, according to how you compare in certain skills, but maybe compared to other ones, you're overbalanced as a caricature. For example, me, I'm really horrible, really horrible with spatial orientation skills. And in the games that I play with spatial orientation testing me, I show that as a caricature. I show heavy memory and attention skills and very low spatial orientation skills. And you can see that that's reflected in my real life when I'm in a town with my wife in a small village in Europe, and I'm like constantly lost. Doesn't matter if I've been there 2 weeks. She might laugh at me because I just don't know where the hell north is, but that's my character, my nature. And so our tool, on the one hand, assesses you diagnostically, hopefully validated in future months by the regulatory bodies. And then 2, it gives you a way to follow and track that progress over time according to all those different cognitive functions. And 3, just get a sense of knowing yourself, your weaknesses and your strengths. And maybe in the weaknesses, you can play games designed to strengthen those weaknesses. So that's the ed tech aspect of it beyond just the healthcare.
That's super cool. Yeah, I think we all want to live in a game because it's more clear cut, right? We don't understand. One of the biggest problems that we have in order to level ourselves up is we're not aware that it's a problem. Like you're like, oh, I know things, I remember things, I know where things are at, and then you get tested and you have some sort of unbiased feedback. Goes, oh, no, you're not, and then you have to come to a realization where you either have some sort of cognitive dissonance where you separate that and you're like, I refuse to accept that, or you embrace it and you use that as a way to get better. So I think it's really cool that you got these things. And what you talk about too is there's the hedonic treadmill, right? You get used to something and then you get used to that speed and you have to go up more, to get more, to get more, to go faster with that pleasure. And so you're constantly on this race. You're using the thing as these little micro pops of practice this, allow your body to retain it, learn it, level it up, but you don't desensitize yourself to the experience versus
right.
If you did it, if you, I don't know, maybe this isn't a good example, but you look at like a spider for 12 hours straight, you're not gonna give you the same type of benefits as you would as the compounding interest of experience over time, leveling that stuff up.
Right.
And, Go for it.
You don't want to numb out of the novelty effect of something. What we are great at is habituating to things. I think in terms of our own personal challenges for taking and seizing the day, it's really because we don't want to get out of our routines because we're habituation kind of addicts. The whole workforce of middle managers are, like, from my point of view, a horrific obscenity, because that's kind of role where you can just be a habituation machine versus an entrepreneur founder. You're constantly thrown into ambiguity where you have to constantly, if you want to survive and live on for the next day, is constantly face your habits and have to rejig them. And so even in the assessment side of things, habits can be our enemies. And I think there are laurels that we rest on. There are also our crutches. They're great in some senses, but I think from my point of view, habituating is always something that blurs our vision.
Yeah, man. Looking at, there's a couple of things you said that are really powerful. The reason that middleman situation, kind of, there's no growth in this space, right? You're either at the bottom going to the top, or you're at the top trying to grow the whole company more. And if you look at the, lack of a better term, heroic journey of a company, what worked for you at level 1 of a company, solo entrepreneur, does not work for, I have 1,000 employees and I'm working for it. Right. You yourself have to grow. And that's why sometimes founders don't become CEOs. They get swapped out unless they have the ability to grow at the speed or the rate of their own self-evolution to keep up with the company. Can you talk to me a little bit about your own evolution in this company, how you've needed to adapt, not rest on your laurels? What have been the things that you had to kind of let go of your crutches and turn those crutches into capes to kind of level up where you're at?
Yeah, you know what? I don't want to be too controversial, but I think it's very few big companies that actually have any hero lifeblood left. Mm-hmm. I mean, fine, Elon Musk, really outlier. You know what I mean?
For sure.
I think I don't think any other names really. I think a lot of people are just personas, or they're just masks. As a puppet piece of the brand image. I think there was a term I once read a long time ago. It's institutional confidence. It's like that's what imbues an employee of a big company. My institutional confidence of being part of this greater brand entity, and I'm an extension of it. And it's actually quite gross when I think about it, to be honest, because when the human spirit is counter to that. It's not about, I think we moved away from tribalism, and you see the best and brightest aspects and features of humanity in an individual when they're not they're not overshadowed by some other kind of, figure in the background that they're connected to, and they have to not say certain things, or they're obliged to be, we, using we as a pronoun, I hope you can follow what I'm trying to say. Whereas, these are elephants that don't move in any sudden trajectory when something happens that requires them to change. They'll do it only when they're forced to. They're not forces of disruption. They're status quo. And that's what entities, worker bees at big companies, ultimately in the middle manager side of things are. I see the world as it is right now because there aren't enough heroes in the majority, and we say there are, and we love using the word innovation. I think no one actually really likes innovation by and large. It's only the very few who like it, because people don't like to go against their habits. Disruption is against their habits. Society's about status quo. Disruption destroys status. It's completely not something we like, and I think we think we like these words, but we don't actually. A lot of us. Yeah. Obviously, my ego is allowing me to pretend I'm the exception here. But with Virtually, I picked such a awful intersection of emerging technology and an application of something that burdens and disrupts, major sectors. Thankfully, COVID has actually helped in that way. I don't want to talk like COVID's a positive thing, but it certainly has helped with VR and greasing the wheels of regulatory bodies. But, as a founder of this kind of startup, and my co-founder and CTO, Hussein, he'll go, why didn't we do a startup in esports? I'm like, why did you have to pick this kind of thing? Because one, we're creating a library of games, not just one app or one experience. We're creating a whole ecosystem, and we're one startup. And the investment community is always changing their opinions, and a lot of the investment community are so old school, especially in Europe. They're like dinosaurs compared to the ones I talk to in the US. But in that kind of environment, everything is adversarial. It means we never have a day without hustling and having to problem solve and having to, we never get to enjoy the other aspect of habits. Is it lets us rest, right? Yep. We can get very fatigued, and mental health is actually a big problem, I think, in the last year or so with me and my founder. We've been through like every kind of scenario to test our wits. So changes every day, actions every day, problems to fix every day, people changing paths constantly. It's crazy, and I think it's also exhilarating because of that.
There's a lot to unpack in that. People have kind of there's an equilibrium of potential, right? Like some people get comfortable. Some companies only want to make 1 million. Some want to make 10 million. Some want to make 1 billion, or whatever that thing might be along the path. And then they get there, they get comfortable, and then they get scared or falling off the edge. And so they don't continue that rate of innovation versus someone like, we'll use Elon Musk as an example. He's not just happy with disrupting one industry. He's disrupting every single industry all at the same time.
Like he's an alien. So
he's truly an alien and or from the future. We're not too sure which, but it's one of those two. And I completely agree with you. And how do you, there's two questions that I'm looking at on this is, one is, as you grow, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, making that a habit, right? And continuing keeping that, okay, my goal is to get to this step. Now we got to take the next step. How do you have, and how do you have growth or innovation as a habit? Even how do you make that uncomfortable thing comfortable, which is a contradiction in and of itself? That's my one question. And the other piece of that journey is along the way, it definitely stresses the mind. And you talked about mental health along the way. So how do you have that as a habit? But then also, how do you armor up for the game of life as you go about here? What does your routine look like so that you can keep yourself sane while you go through all of this?
So one of the things, Elon Musk brings up is a kind of individual that we've lost kind of sight of in modern life, where we've created factory kind of best practices for education and throwing you into the factory, make you like this person and get you ready for that hyper specialized role. And we don't look at that Renaissance man or Renaissance woman. I want to unpack that word and revive it, but the Renaissance spirit of being able to be not necessarily a master, but giving yourself permission to become a dilettante or someone who is fairly good at this and that and change tracks and become go and do a startup completely in the opposite way. Elon Musk, he's like, I'm going to go and do this, and it's completely diametrically opposite to his experience and background. He goes, F it, I'm going to do it, and he just does it, and he puts $1 billion behind it, and that doesn't hurt. But I think when you're hyper specialized through the system, you lose a lot of that inner aspects to yourself that allows you to think of your identity as being able to be many other things, multiple things, parallel lives in one thing that could be relived in this life. If you want to be something, we watch the Disney films on our couch eating, microwave food or whatever, and we think about that. But literally, we don't think it's possible to be many things at once and many things in one lifetime. We kind of pigeonhole ourselves. And so, my point of view and the kind of routine, I'm going to jump a little bit. The routine I do is kind of connected to this. I'm a junkie for psychoanalytical literature. Carl Jung, I think, is the source of the hero's journey. And, Joseph Campbell and the like, were stepping on the shoulders of giants like Jung and Nietzsche and many other, philosophers that extend back to the Greek times and the pre-Socratic times and Pythagoras and all of these amazing societies where one of the most important aspects of someone is their psychology and the depth of their thinking and emotional feeling. And one thing I have to say that maybe has been lost in what I've studied about human psychology is our appreciation and our practice of symbolic thinking, thinking of metaphors and archetypes. I mean, the hero is an archetype. Back in the time of ancient Greece, their society was steeped with a horde, a myriad of heroic tales and scenarios of every kind, because their culture was constantly looking at heroic deeds and circumstances. And I believe, this might be conjecture, I believe they use that as inner metaphors for their, confrontation of life and the things that life brings to you as challenges, and how you can, face those things, because all of those archetypes and all of those mythologies and those stories were actually all kind of inside you already, but it's kind of like ready to be triggered according to you going out there and blasting yourself into novelty and meaning. It only activates. I swear to God, they're going to find out in 1,000 years, or maybe in 5 years, that genes turn on based on us forcing ourselves into new experiences. And that activates our potential, because it's not because it's our potential, it's already in there. It's just like, I think our operating system is like, oh, you want to live a boring life? Then there's no need to activate these additional, genes of X, Y, and Z features and talents and traits. And that's the Renaissance spirit, right? Until Elon Musk throws himself into the space territory, he doesn't offer himself that opportunity to adapt and activate himself and his Latin sides to be able to be proficient in that sector, in that new, dark corner where he can have an impact.
Yeah, man. There's taking it one thing at a time here. Carl Jung. Carl Jung had one of the things I love is the man child, the God who remained forever young, right? That is the greatest shame that someone has is the Rose said to live a life of quiet desperation, go into the grave with a song unsung in them, right? So it's the same thing. It's that we have this potential, and then one of the beautiful things about kids and small is that they have so much potential, right? The potential to grow into who they are, what they want to be, and they can go in any which direction. And the only way to really tap into that is to be challenged. Like as parents, there's this really weird balance. I was talking in the last podcast about this to a father, and I don't know if you're a dad, but like you want your kids to be safe and protected, but you want them to be ready for life. So you need to expose them to dangers and trust that they'll figure it out, but you don't want them to get hurt. You don't want to rob the child of their innocence, but at the same time you want to prepare them for life. And so the biggest challenge and the greatest shames is having someone not reach their full potential. And what you're talking about in terms of genetics, I believe, is epigenetics. Epigenetics is that your environment affects your nature, because those genes get switched on based upon demand. And so you have what I would say, and I don't know if this is a term, but I'll coin it right now if it's not, you have your genetic potential. You have the genetic potential to be who you are if you are willing to put yourself in enough stressful situations, much like Elon Musk does. Because there's no way that Elon Musk wakes up every day and goes, the world's great, everything's calm, I'm doing great. He's forged himself through many tireless nights, sleeping under his couch or his desk to be able to make that type of thing happen. But it's like we want that comfortable life, but we also want to see ourselves as heroic. We want both sides at the same time. And that's why I think you're right. The old school gods, Greeks, mythos, all those types of stories, the gods are just your emotional sets, Ares and Athena and all these other
right.
types of, they're all the emotions embodied in the human spirit. And it's that emotion reached to its full potential of war, potential of love, right?
Right.
And those things that we see those gods, but then we see that and we can embody those characteristics and try to strive for whatever God we seek to be, right?
And one thing about those stories is actually the gods are sometimes the adversaries or the influences that are throwing the hero or the would-be hero left or right and through the storms, because those emotions, let's say Ares or Mars, reflecting the adrenal glands maybe, and kind of like that kind of aspect of our rage and high octane adrenaline kind of frenzy, right? Where how do you, as the hero aspect of your ego, confront a situation that is being influenced by a god of hormones, and how can you traverse and problem solve and keep your wits about you? And I think more importantly, how can you become meta to your regular self? Can you, in that moment, and the thing I think, when you talk about meditation and meditative practices and whatever people do to try to go above the clouds of their landscape, their inner landscape, you have to go meta or at least strive for it to be a hero in any circumstance, inner or outer. And I think the gods and those tales kind of give us, that kind of storybook, but it's not fiction. It's allegory, it's metaphor, it's symbolic thinking. And I think when you have that kind of symbolic thinking, it's something that you do, and you do see the world as that kind of dramatic theater, and the purpose of it is to become a better and better version of yourself. It's the point.
Yeah, no, 100%. And what it makes me think about, it's almost like, the gods, the emotions rule you like a god, right? You have very little say over them. They pull you into places. They take you where you want to go. And if you look at like God of War, I mean, you literally have to climb Mount Olympus to become a god, to master the gods, to take your rightful place and say, I choose a higher potential in myself above the gods, as they say. And it's really interesting because you're right. There's metaphors. I mean, but that's how we learn. We learn through stories. Stories is the combinations of emotions and lessons put together in something that you can then translate into your own world. Then when you see that pattern, you apply that pattern to your own life, and you can get lessons from anything, right? You get lessons from your emotions. You get lessons from the gods teaching you, oh God, why did you do this to me? And it's really you doing it to you. So it's like there's so much in that I totally agree. I would love to looking at what I call threshold guardians. So along the way, you've had to face your own inner gods and demons and things like that. As you've gone through this, can you talk to me about some of the threshold guardians you've faced as you've gone through this heroic journey of creating Virtual Leap and on this path of being an entrepreneur?
When I was as a game publisher, that was a much simpler world when you talk about, threshold guardians or gatekeepers or people, who are ultimately, I denigrated the middle manager kind of individual, because that's my story right now, is I'm constantly facing middle managers, and middle managers are what? They're the immune system of organizations from keeping their status quo while still kind of compromising and taking in some, innovation at their own terms and at their own timing and in their own way. They're always trying to, as an immune system, buffer reality out and keep themselves and their walled gardens, somewhat stable and undisrupted, right? I mean, survival of an organism is based on immune system in an organism, and I think innovation is a threatening force, just as much it is at the end of the tunnel a positive one. And so when I face as an entrepreneur that can potentially be disrupting a healthcare sector, mental health industries, ed tech, these are very, very stable, solid sectors. At least they were much more. They're less so now, even though they are, but they're much more open to change since the biblical plague onset upon us. But I have to deal with people who go, I don't believe in VR, or maybe the person does believe in VR, but the person on top of them, their other secondary middle manager, doesn't believe in VR, or they're just stubborn about it. You're dealing with layers and layers of code. Emerging tech is just way too new for the pace of psychology as it stands today. I think when you're talking about the singularity and all those kind of ideas, I think it's the idea and the appreciation that things are accelerating, and people need to, as psychological entities in any organization, be faster and quicker into adapting and being open-minded. But that's not the case. I don't think human psychology has improved in the last 2,000-3,000 years. That's a really controversial thing to say, but I really don't. I read, if you read Homer or you read some savants from 1,000 years ago, I don't think necessarily we have actually evolved in the inner dimension. I think it's the same hero's journey as before. It's the same one as today. I don't even think we're even at a higher potential than we are 1,500 years ago, for example. I think technology makes us think we're evolving because it progresses with or without us. Yeah. But we're kind of its slaves,
Yeah, monkeys with computers. Yeah,
monkeys with computers.
100%. Yeah, Homer's Odyssey is one of the oldest hero's journeys ever created. It's thousands of years old. Right. And if you look at it, I saw my niece and my nephew, like 6 years old and 8 years old, just spent the holidays with them. I saw them just screaming and crying over the fact that someone ripped a piece of paper. And I was just like, and I realized that as you get older, you feel like you get smarter, but your emotions don't evolve. You don't evolve your emotions. You still have the same emotions. It's just different things set you off. And I think as a society, it's the same thing's true, right? As we've gotten, we still have love. We still have hate. We're still, descendants of chimpanzees and bonobos. We still can solve things with either violence and power or love and sex, and those types of things they're always going to be around us as we try to reach this higher level of things. But the thing that's beautiful about the hero's journey and these types of things is that you can reach a higher potential if you're willing to sacrifice your ego, which feels like death, to get to that next level, to go through and actually level up like who you are and what you do. With that, you're talking about middle managers now. There's nothing here to shame middle managers. It's where you are. And the thing is, they could have a purpose. As long as people have a purpose. I've met people that are frontline employees that have a purpose, and maybe not the job's a purpose, or that's a purpose, or they find something else. And so there's value in that for them to have that purpose. And one could be to make sure that this company is safe and make sure that it works. And when you said immune system, I totally run a bell in my head, because
they're T cells, man. They're T cells.
Is this an invader? Is this an invader?
Yeah,
Should we block? Should we block? Right? But
can I leave at 5 p.m.?
Yeah.
My lunch breaks here in Portugal. I'm gonna have my 2-hour, lunch break. Listen, man. Listen, the new world of startups with crazy running on emerging tech octane. This is not a positivity thing. But you're right. I should not be dissing that type of profile. I just want to challenge them to be aware of that, so that they can help innovators innovate and bleed through into all stratas of organizations. Because I promise you, the world would be in a better place right now in a COVID world if that was the case. We're suffering way more than we need to be because of our stagnant ways of treating the world.
Yeah, and a couple of things on that. Dis or no dis, it's a challenge to them. Do they hear their own call of adventure, right? Are they willing to step out into the brave unknown and try something new? Or are they going to stay a part of their community and stay where they're at? The challenge that you have with a lot of those types of things is everyone has a precognitive bias to their own information. So whatever you know right now is more important than any new information that you're going to learn. And so trying to have someone know that they know that VR is valuable, unless they experience it for themselves. It's like people say this, and so it's a weird trite statement, but people love to buy, but they hate to be sold. So trying to sell someone on VR doesn't work. They have to really understand it, experience it, value it, appreciate it, and then themselves buy into it. Because trying to force someone to do anything, you can taunt someone. You can say, "Hey, T-cell, I don't think you fully understand. I'm your friend. I'm not your foe. I'm here to level you up, not bring you down. Let me in. I am medicine. I'm not a disease." So, I think so. There's no knocks on them. People, and just because that's where they are, they could always go off and build their own business, or bring in innovation, or be a part of something that grows the company into new places, and become the hero of their own community. So there's so much there that they can do in that. It's just, how do you, how do you inspire them and show them that this is the right way? You say that because it is a challenge to someone that doesn't understand the value of the VR and what you bring. How do you inspire them to the potential of what you're bringing to them?
Well, you have to want to. Here's a negative. I just, my day on day, it's just filled with things that are reality, where I'm dealing with all sorts of organizations. Where people they don't have the interest. Here's one thing. I just want to throw this out there as an idea, but I read it when I was in my teens, and it really had an effect on me. And it's the idea that you mentioned something that relates to this just a second ago. I just can't remember, but it's like the human system has a lot of hormonal activity at any given time, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're, an embryo, or when you're a 1-year-old, or you're like a toddler, then adolescent, and then older, that level of hormonal activity goes from like high activity to much lower activity. It's like living in a storm of the craziest hormonal mess possible, and you wonder why that toddler doesn't know what the hell's happening, because there's 1,000 things happening. And that's the reason why, for example, summertime was such a long season when you're a kid in your memory, but it's so quick nowadays, because less and less hormonal charge, less and less adrenaline, testosterone, all these chemicals are flurry in an older person than a younger person. And so when you're getting older, that storm starts to settle and get calmer, and that allows you to maybe make wiser decisions because that storm isn't there. But that gives you the misperception that you're becoming, in fact, wiser. My experiment of a movie is to, again, I think they've done examples of this, but not in the way I would want. Throw that person in their 80s who just thinks they're like, they are experienced, but put that consciousness into a hormonal 15-year-old, and let's see if their decisions are all perfect and right and smart and wise, because sometimes we're just a reflection of the environment, and internal environment is something that really stands for a great deal. And so when I'm dealing with people who are stakeholders, who are working at certain ages or in certain departments that I need to work with and hopefully convince to work with us in some shape or form for the benefit of whatever, I'm dealing with people with preconceptions about, like you say, their model of reality is something that they think is firm, and they think a lot of things are ones and zeros, and they won't take the ones and turn them into zeros just to experiment with crazy people like me. So it's a real upward thing. I'm really just trying to find people who are even listening, and when I find those people who listen, then I have a chance. But a good number of the majority are just deaf ears to even the idea of it, and they're late adopters. And so that's my challenge as a company CEO, is to just find the resonating cells, friendly T cells.
I love it. With that, okay, so you're talking about the ones and zeros, people that refuse to be emotionally moved by VR, because VR is very emotional of an experience. So how do you show, with psychology, because emotions is very ephemeral, right? You show that you have a psychological impact on people. How do you prove that? How do you prove that with science? How do you show them, look, objectively, with ones and zeros, our system works. Our system is proven to help you improve your mental wellness and all that. How do you make that a ones and zeros decision?
In our sector, you have to do studies, either clinical studies first and foremost, the kind that after a couple of phases, hopefully, knock on wood, they get approved and validated, and you become a reimbursable solution and the like. And that's a really big thing, because you have to go through peer-reviewed scientific rigor in order to get there. And then you have, on the other hand, you have health economic studies, like doing something with a big company and having them all kind of do brain training as part of their human performance program. One big company, requested that from us a few weeks ago, and they want to have hundreds of these new headsets deployed in their organization, and they want to have HR, sales training, all sorts of VR kind of content, but also, for example, self-help sort of diagnostic tools like ours. And for the human performance programs. But that's the thing. You have to ultimately have people who are receptive to even looking at those studies in the first place. But they do take time. And hopefully in the next year or two, we're going to see a lot of those kind of results come out and convince more people.
Yeah, and that's what made me interested about the VR X book you're talking about. I was like, oh, there's studies out there. There's ways to show people.
5,000.
5,000.
Globally.
Just a couple to read through. Well,
I mean, the FDA just declared applied VR. Their solution for pain management is now a prescribed treatment for pain. I mean, why is that? Because they found when you're in VR, certain parts of the brain responsible for pain reception, they actually dampen. So the pain receptors are actually dampened in VR. So it's a pain management solution. The FDA just did that last year. I mean, also in June last year, the FDA just declared the first video game as a prescribed treatment for pediatric ADHD. Now a doctor can prescribe a video game versus a drug, for example, or maybe pair it together. So last year was VR hitting validation with the FDA and video games. And so intersection of VR, video games, all these things are all happening right now. So I think 2021, aside from the craziness of still being in this weird situation, surreal situation, there's a lot of things to be excited about.
Dude, yeah, and I had Vengelis on the podcast a little while ago talking about all his journeys with that, which is pretty interesting. And you're you're talking about the great pandemic, as we know it, as people will come to know it. It turned for all of us, all of our evangelists that we are. It turned virtual reality to everybody else from a vitamin to a pain pill overnight. We went from a nice to have to. There's no other way for us to connect in like a shared meet space kind of way, other than doing this type of thing, which is great for, you know, people that have, you know, been believers for so long in the space. Believers being that they've experienced it, they're behind it. With you and proving out the systems and doing these clinical studies, are you using, because there's really three ways to really measure things, right? You have self-efficacy reports, you have the actual reports of observers, then you have biofeedback. Those are the three ways you can really measure anything. So what about you and your systems and the studies that you're going through? How are you measuring the systems, and what does that look like for you in terms of clinical studies and reports?
So, you know, when we work on these studies, it's never us leading it. We find partners. So, for example, institutes or academic medical research institutes. For example, we're working with the VA healthcare system in San Francisco. We're working with the Pacific Brain Health Center. In Barcelona, for example, we're working with one of the biggest university research hospitals, and they're doing a study. They're recruiting for a study right now. And what they've done is they're focusing on how does diabetes cause a high risk factor to developing dementia, and how can a tool like Virtual Leap's VR brain training solution be used as a way to be a gold standard for assessing really way faster, more reliably in all those ways, and basically set us as the gold standard for cognitive assessment. And then also see if there's any generative evidence for what we call transferability. So do people actually start remembering their grocery list better if they're regularly doing this kind of activity? So there's the assessment side as a single priority aim. And then the secondary aim of seeing, is there a therapeutic aspect? And so when they, as our partner leading the study, what they do is they create a clinical protocol in partnership with us, who we kind of assist them. And that clinical protocol shows what's the sample size, where's the geography of the people we're recruiting, how long are they going to do this for? For them, in their case, it's a 24-month study. Now, how are we going to test it, like you say? So what their primary aim for that particular partner is to actually correlate us to neuroimaging and brain scans, because they want to be able to show, is there a correlation with VR gameplay patterns specifically focused on targeting these functions, and what you see in neuroimaging scans and what we know about that. On top of that, of course, throughout the whole study, they use traditional methodologies like the MoCA assessment tool and so on, that are just tried and true, traditional pen and paper, or 2D screen-based kind of like surveys and exercises that they can use to correlate as well. So do our versions of the particular traditional methodology, do they also correlate? And does it correlate with neuroimaging? It's all about matching up to the status quo of what technologies we already accept now, and that's how we can correlate and then say that this one, by extension, is the new leader in the market in terms of bleeding edge.
That's so cool. I'm so glad how much technology has evolved along the way. You're talking about testing for diabetes, and we know back in the day, I don't know if you know this, diabetes testing, they'd drink your pee to see if it was sweet. Way better tests now. Things have gotten better from the whole experience. And you're talking about the party. I know, right? It's a fact. Look it up. That's what doctors used to do. If it was sweet,
I'm writing it on my notebook.
Take a look. And
drinking pee.
You can also find out firsthand knowledge. You can either learn it from other people, or you can find it out yourself. I'll let you decide.
Ask people, did you drink your pee?
Is your pee sweet, sir?
Is your pee sweet? It sounds
Don't forget
different.
The sir at the end. It makes it professional. So look at the clinical studies, right? And look at those different things. So partnering up with experts in the space, so they can run the clinic, say, look, you're experts, and bring the technology and a lot of the neuroscience to it, but then partnering up with the clinical person to see if that makes sense is where we're at with technology. And you're talking about brain scans and all these other cool things of unbiased information to show that there is actual internal progress in the system, where not only your psychology affects your physiology can affect your psychology, i.e. brain scans and all those biofeedback systems. What excites you about the future of these types of biofeedback technologies? What are the areas of these types of technologies coming up that you're excited for, that you want to envision 1, 2, 5 years out, that really gets you going?
Well, one of the partnerships we just recently announced a couple months ago is with a company called Kernel. It's a brain-computer interface company that just came out of stealth, in fact, just a couple months ago. And they have a device that ultimately is reading your brain activity, but in real time, right? Imagine if you don't have to go into a freaking giant, coffin machine. I'm a little bit claustrophobic. I don't really want to go in there. And a lot of people who start to feel symptoms of this or that, or want to check their own brain health, there's so much a barrier in terms of cost, in terms of access to that huge machine. These devices are now being fitted out so that in like 10, 20 years, maybe even earlier, anyone can be able to get their own neuroscience real-time data immediately. I mean, we're seeing that with all sorts of, transhumanist, biohacker kind of, tech for breathing and biomarkers and pulse and heart rate variability, and all these kind of things are all coming together. And I think we're starting to develop the digestion of analytical tools that can allow normal humans that don't have any intellectual, understanding of what's happening, to have numbers quantifying things about their cognition and their state and their health. It really excites me to have immediate feedback available to us that's quantifiable through these technologies that are just amplified with VR, and amplified with big data, and amplified with AI. But ultimately, it's what's the final output that makes my life more actionable and meaningful and clear, just a little bit less confusion into the human drama, that's exciting.
That is so cool. Yeah. Empowering the end user. It makes me think about 3D printers. Years ago, 3D printers, I had to go to a Maker Tech event and then harangue of several people that tried to print up this stereolithographic, 3D little doll I was trying to make. Nowadays, you can order it on Amazon, have it show up your house in a day, and you're ready to go. That dissemination of technology you're saying the same thing is true using VR and biofeedback, where eventually the end user is going to be at home. They're going to be their own doctor. They're going to be their own therapist. They're going to be their own
empowered patient.
Yeah.
You're right. Everything is about empowering the worker bee into being a somewhat give them superpowers to some extent. Ultimately that's what we're all looking for too, right? To see through walls.
Yeah. What are the mental health superpowers that your system provides? Looking at in terms of mental health, right? What are you talked about spatial, right? And especially understanding that memory. What about emotionally? What are the can you kind of give me the different tracks? If we were to kind of level those things up, what are those different tracks?
So we wouldn't get into, emotional assessments. Ours would be more about the kind of the muscles of your brain that allow you to be able to do certain kind of, activities by using those muscles. So if you need to problem solve or do processing of certain numbers that you have to input in your head, or be able to understand the spatial, measurements and so on better and better. And, I suck with meters, like I mentioned, and all these kind of things. But for example, one of the games, whenever we create a game, it's based on pre-existing assessment tools or pre-existing research. And so, for example, one of our games is called Magic Deck. It was based on the research of the University of Cambridge. Dr. Barbara Sahakian and her team had created this type of game mechanism that tested episodic memory, a type of long-term memory. And they found that when you play out this type of memory game, it increases neural activity in the region of the brain associated with schizophrenia. And they found that with playing this type of game regularly, schizophrenia, the symptoms of it, would actually lessen and abate. So from the point of view of mental health in our tool, it's when you start to create these games that are actually activating certain, pathways of the human, mechanism and our way of perception and all these kind of things, it's also doing things like increasing neural activity and changing the landscape, at least momentarily. And we know neuroplasticity wise that when you do something like that consistently, you can reshape the brain literally. And so that's the premise of our technology, is that these kind of content activity it's just a means of going with the motions, therefore kind of creating an effect, and then having that effect hopefully start to gel and bring you to more wholesome, a better, healthy, kind of homeostatic kind of state for yourself. And if you are out of balance, this kind of thing would be serving as the gym for the mind. And in 10 years, it might not be so weird for someone to take on their AR glasses and start playing 10, 15 minutes of some mental exercises based on the kind of technology and solutions we've created. And they'll see it the same way of that promotes their mental health as we right now see going for a run and going to the gym as promoting our physical health. I think that's going to be what it will become.
That's so cool. The empowering patients to reshape the brain. I think that's really cool. And you can actually look at that.
I'm going to copyright that.
There you go.
You just put it, you put it together. You synergized it.
I'm just Amir, man. That's cool. No, so that is really cool. This is all amazing. If people want to find out more about what you do, how to find it, how to get a hold of it, and also how to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Well, LinkedIn, I'm a junkie. I just can't help it. I really like that platform. I've had for like a decade at least. So contact me on LinkedIn. If you have like a custom message that tells me why you're connecting, like for example, you heard me on this show, then at least I know you're not going to sell me a vacuum cleaner or something, and I will add you. You can also email me at Amir, my first name, at Virtually, the company name. And I'm happy to hear from you that way. But I'm very friendly as long as you're not trying to sell me vacuum cleaners.
Yeah, I know, right? Would you like to buy a book of encyclopedias?
Wow, I miss those. I miss those people. I remember very clearly one guy coming in and he was sweating for it was such a hot summer day. And my mom actually invited him. She bought the whole thing, and then she asked to give him lemonade, or some kind of lemonade. I remember he was sweating. Like it was a beautiful moment.
Kindness can go a long way, Amir. Brother, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great talk. Look forward to chatting more with you later, and best luck on you and your hero's journey.
Thank you for having me, Dylan.
Of course, Amir. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes of Reality podcast. Check out heroesofreality.com for more episodes. While you're there, you can also take the Heroes quiz to find out what kind of hero you are. Or, if you have a great story and want to be on the podcast, tell us why your hero's journey will inspire others. Thank you for listening.